The happiest day of my son's life turned into the most humiliating moment of mine. As guests cheered, his bride walked up to me, her eyes cold, and whispered, "You don't belong here, leave." My heart shattered. Little did she know, every flower, every meal, every smile in that hall was paid for by me. And with one decision, I turned their dream wedding into a nightmare they would never forget. I always believed that being a father meant sacrificing quietly, loving endlessly, and celebrating loudly when your children reached their milestones. From the moment my son was born, I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to make sure he had the best of everything. His childhood was not one of luxury, but of careful provision. I wanted him to stand on a solid foundation, the one I never had. My wife and I often skipped vacations, fancy clothes, even small indulgences, so that every dollar could go into our son's education, his passions, his dreams. When he told us he was getting married, my heart swelled with pride. A wedding, I thought, was not just a celebration of love, but the ultimate testament that all my sacrifices had been worth it. My son had found a partner, and together they would start their own family, their own story. Without hesitation, I assured him, "Don't worry about the expenses, son. This is your day. I'll handle everything." And I did. I poured my life savings, years of sweat and labor, into making his wedding a grand event. The flowers, the music, the catering, the hall, every little detail was paid for by me. I wanted my son and his bride to remember this as the most beautiful day of their lives. Every time the wedding planner asked about the budget, I waved my hand dismissively. "Whatever it takes," I said. Nothing was too much for my boy. In the months leading up to the wedding, I noticed small changes. His bride-to-be, a young woman who rarely spoke to me with warmth, began to show subtle signs of disdain. Her eyes often rolled when I made suggestions. Her tone grew curt whenever I offered help. I brushed it off as nerves. After all, weddings are stressful. I told myself she would warm up eventually, once we became family. I ignored the way she excluded me from decisions, the way she leaned into her parents for approval, but dismissed me as though I were a burden. Still, I carried on. I smiled as I signed the checks, as I approved the menus, as I picked the wine. I told myself, it doesn't matter how she sees me. What matters is my son's happiness. When the big day finally arrived, I put on my best suit, polished my old shoes until they gleamed, and held my head high. I was not just a father that day. I was the man behind the curtain, the one who had made the magic possible. Guests arrived, laughter filled the hall, music floated in the air, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe this day would be perfect. Little did I know, the storm was just about to break. The hall shimmered with golden lights as guests settled into their seats, and I stood near the entrance, greeting family and old friends with pride swelling in my chest. Everywhere I looked, I saw pieces of myself. The towering floral arrangements I had insisted on, the elegant table settings I had chosen after hours of deliberation, the live band whose deposit had come directly from my pocket. This was not just my son's wedding. It was my gift to him, one I hoped he would cherish forever. I watched as he entered, handsome in his tailored suit, his eyes glowing with anticipation. For a fleeting moment, I felt like every struggle, every sleepless night, every extra shift at work had led to this. He looked happy, and that alone made me feel that all the sacrifices had been worth it. Then came the bride, gliding down the aisle in her white gown, all eyes fixed on her. She looked radiant, but her smile never reached her eyes when they briefly met mine. There was something cold, almost dismissive in her gaze, as if I were a stranger who had stumbled into a place I didn't belong. My heart dipped, but I forced myself to push away the unease. Today was not about me. Today was theirs. During the ceremony, I sat quietly, my hands folded, trying to absorb every word, every vow. I caught myself choking back tears when my son promised to love and protect her. But even in that tender moment, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. Her parents shot me occasional glances, not hostile, but heavy with a silent judgment that made me shift uncomfortably in my seat. After the vows were exchanged and the applause thundered through the hall, I made my way toward the reception area. The scent of food filled the air. Waiters bustled about with trays of champagne, and laughter rang out in every corner. Guests complimented me, some even clapping me on the back, saying, "What a beautiful wedding. You've done an incredible job." I smiled, nodded, but deep down I felt a strange emptiness. Then came the first dance. I watched my son twirl his new bride across the floor, her gown sparkling under the lights. Guests cheered, clapped, and recorded videos on their phones. It was a moment of pure celebration, but I stood alone at the edge of the dance floor, invisible, unnoticed, as though I were merely an extra in a show I had produced. When the song ended and the couple mingled among the guests, I tried to approach them, to share a hug, a few words of love, but the bride intercepted me with a glance so sharp it stopped me in my tracks. She leaned in toward my son, whispered something in his ear, and his smile faltered. My stomach churned as he looked at me briefly, then quickly looked away. Something had shifted, and I could feel it in my bones. Still, I held my tongue. This was their night. My pride, my discomfort, my suspicions, none of it mattered compared to my son's happiness. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. What I didn't know was that before the night ended, my role as a proud father would twist into something darker, something humiliating, and something that would awaken a fire in me I didn't know I had. As the reception continued, I tried to join conversations, but the warmth I expected from my new daughter-in-law was nowhere to be found. She smiled politely at distant relatives, laughed at jokes I didn't hear, and made small gestures of affection toward my son. But whenever I approached, her expression stiffened, her eyes flicking past me as if I were an inconvenient shadow. I reminded myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to create a scene on this important day. I watched her whisper to my son repeatedly, pointing subtly in my direction. Each time he would glance at me, then force a strained smile. It hurt more than I expected, seeing him caught between his bride and me, his father, the man who had raised him and worked tirelessly to give him everything. But I didn't want to ruin the moment. I told myself I would wait until after the reception to address it. The speeches began. Friends, cousins, and colleagues all shared stories of love, friendship, and support. When it came time for my turn, I stood up, cleared my throat, and began to speak. I wanted to honor my son and his bride, to express pride and joy, but before I could get more than a few sentences out, I noticed her glaring at me. Her lips pressed tightly, and she subtly shook her head. A whisper reached my ears. "Why is he even talking?" "Leave, please." The word struck me like a slap. I froze mid-sentence, my voice faltering as the entire room seemed to hush for a moment. My son's eyes darted nervously between us. A red flush rose to my cheeks. Guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure of what was happening. My heart pounded, but I refused to leave immediately. How could I? I had done so much, spent so much, sacrificed so much. Was I really being told to leave at my own son's wedding? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions, and continued speaking, softening my tone, trying not to ignite further tension. But each word was a struggle. Each smile I forced felt hollow. My mind raced, trying to comprehend how someone I had never wronged could treat me with such disdain in front of everyone. Later, as I retreated to the side of the hall to sip water and gather my composure, I overheard her whispering to her friends, "He thinks he's paying for everything, but I don't want him here. He ruins everything." My chest tightened. The betrayal wasn't just in her words. It was in the way my son didn't defend me, didn't protest, didn't say a single word. The boy I raised, the boy I poured my life into, was letting me be humiliated by the woman he chose. For the first time that evening, the pride and joy I had felt walking into that hall began to erode. I realized that this wedding, which I had envisioned as a celebration of love and family, had become the stage for one of the most painful experiences of my life. And deep down a spark began to form, a thought that I would not let this disrespect go unanswered. Enjoying this story? Tap like and subscribe to never miss a twist. The rest of the evening passed like a surreal blur. Every laugh, every toast, every clink of glasses seemed to mock me in a way I couldn't explain. I tried to stay composed, reminding myself that my focus should be my son's happiness, but it was impossible to ignore the icy tension that had settled over me. Guests whispered, glanced at me, and some even exchanged awkward smiles. Sensing the unspoken conflict, I walked past the lavish dessert table I had carefully selected, the one I had spent hours discussing with the pastry chef. Chocolate fountains, ornate cupcakes, and hand-decorated pastries, all paid for by me, stood as silent witnesses to the humiliation I was enduring. She was ignoring me completely, chatting animatedly with friends and family, laughing as if I didn't exist. The audacity cut deeper than I could have imagined. I tried to speak with my son privately, hoping for at least some support, some acknowledgement of the situation. But he avoided eye contact, mumbling excuses about being busy, about entertaining guests. My stomach sank. He had been my pride, my joy, my reason for pushing through every hardship. And now he seemed like a stranger protecting the bride instead of me. I had spent my life building, providing, and sacrificing, and yet, in this single night, all of it felt invisible. By the time the final speeches ended and the first dance concluded, I had a sinking sense of clarity. This wedding was not about celebrating my son's love. It was about the bride and her family asserting their control. The respect, gratitude, and acknowledgement I expected, as the man who had funded every detail of this event, were gone. And in that moment, a seed of determination took root within me. If they thought they could humiliate me without consequences, they were gravely mistaken. I retreated to a quiet corner of the hall, my hands trembling slightly as I thought about the months of planning, the thousands of dollars spent, and the sheer betrayal of being told to leave. I reviewed the contracts, the payments, the agreements I had made with the vendors. Everything was within my power. Every dollar I had spent, every commitment I had made, it could all be undone. And the thought filled me with a cautious, simmering sense of satisfaction. I knew then that this wedding, which had begun as a celebration of love and joy, was about to become a lesson in respect and consequences. They had underestimated me, and I was ready to ensure that no one would ever forget it. The evening might have been theirs to enjoy, but the next moves, the true reckoning, would be mine to orchestrate. The night wore on, but the humiliation lingered like a shadow. I couldn't shake the memory of her cold whisper, the way my son had averted his gaze, and the stifled murmurs of the guests who had noticed the tension. Every smile I forced, every polite nod felt like a mask hiding the storm building inside me. I realized that this wasn't just a slight, it was a deliberate act of disrespect. After the speeches and dances, I retreated to the edge of the hall, checking on the arrangements I had meticulously paid for. The band, the decorations, the catering staff, all of it owed to my hard work and money. And yet they were being enjoyed by people who openly disrespected me. My blood boiled. How could they treat me, the one who had made this day possible, as if I were a stranger? I started reviewing the vendor agreements in my mind. Every contract, every deposit, every payment, I had full control. If I wanted, I could halt every service, cancel every booking. The idea of taking action thrilled me, a surge of power replacing the humiliation. This bride and her family had underestimated me, assumed that money would buy them silence and compliance. They had miscalculated. I also considered the social dynamics at play. The whispers, the glances, the subtle digs. It wasn't just disrespect. It was an attempt to publicly humiliate me, to make me invisible in my own son's wedding. I remembered the way she had laughed while I tried to speak during my speech, how she had made comments that no parent should endure on such a momentous day. I clenched my fists, my mind racing with ideas. This was no longer about anger, it was about strategy. I needed to act, but carefully. If I reacted impulsively, it could backfire, but if I played my cards right, I could make a statement that they would never forget. Every dollar spent, every contract signed, every detail meticulously planned could become my weapon. And so, while the rest of the guests celebrated, I began plotting. I visualized the exact sequence of actions that would turn this humiliation around. They thought they could exclude me, mock me, and dictate the terms of my presence. But by the end of this night, the tables would turn. Respect would be restored, and they would understand the price of underestimating a father's pride and control. Little did they know, the happiest day of their lives was about to become the stage for a lesson in respect, power, and consequences, one orchestrated entirely by me. The next morning, the calm of the hotel room contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside me. I sat quietly at the desk, reviewing every detail of the wedding logistics. Contracts, payments, deposits, everything was carefully documented, everything under my control. It occurred to me that the very foundation of this extravagant celebration rested entirely on my contributions, and yet the bride had dared to humiliate me publicly. My blood boiled at the thought. I remembered her whispering to the bridesmaids, her dismissive gestures, the way she smirked while guests unknowingly glanced my way. That smirk, so small yet so sharp, had cut deeper than any harsh word. My son had remained silent, his loyalty clearly split. This was a betrayal not just of me as a father, but of all the sacrifices I had made for him over the years. The more I replayed the moments in my mind, the clearer it became. I would not allow this to go unanswered. Slowly, a plan began to form. I didn't want to cause a public scene during the ongoing celebrations. The humiliation had already been done. But there were ways to ensure that the disrespect didn't go unpunished. I considered contacting the vendors, reviewing contracts, and leveraging the very arrangements that had once been gifts to my son and his bride. Every service, catering, floral, music could be paused or cancelled without warning. The thought of taking control filled me with a quiet satisfaction. While the reception was still buzzing, I discreetly sent messages to key vendors, confirming all arrangements while keeping the possibility of strategic cancellations in my pocket. I imagined the shock on the bride's face when she realized that the man she thought powerless could, with a few simple moves, alter the entire course of her dream day. It wasn't vengeance yet, it was leverage. Every detail she had taken for granted was now a potential tool in my hands. By the time the morning faded into afternoon, I felt a sense of calm resolve. The humiliation had ignited a fire, but this fire was tempered by careful thought. I wouldn't act impulsively. I would act with precision. The rising tension from the previous night had transformed into a strategic blueprint. I would ensure that respect was restored, not through confrontation or shouting, but through actions that spoke louder than words ever could. This was no longer merely about anger. It was about re-establishing control, asserting authority, and teaching a lesson that would be remembered long after the music stopped and the guests went home. The wedding had given me an opportunity, and I intended to use it. By mid-afternoon, the wedding celebrations were in full swing. Guests were laughing, toasting, and enjoying the lavish feast that I had paid for. Every smile and cheer from the crowd reminded me of the stark contrast between the joy around me and the humiliation I had endured. I watched my son and his bride from a distance, noting the subtle arrogance in her gestures, the way she held her head high as if daring me to confront her. The audacity was unbearable, yet I remained calm, observing, calculating. I began to imagine scenarios in which their perfect day could unravel, not through malice, but through precise strategic decisions. What if a key element went missing? A flower arrangement that symbolized a crucial part of the ceremony? The photographer? The catering staff? Each component I had arranged meticulously could be altered with a simple call or instruction. And each of these small disruptions would carry a profound message. Respect is not optional. I kept a close eye on my son as well. He moved between the guests and his new bride, clearly unaware of the tension simmering under the surface. His happiness, however, was tainted by his passive stance. He hadn't defended me, nor had he acknowledged the disrespect I faced. This lack of loyalty fueled my determination. It was not only the bride I would need to teach a lesson to, it was also the son who had allowed this treatment to occur. My mind raced with the possibilities, each more satisfying than the last. I rehearsed conversations with vendors in my head, imagining the moment of surprise when certain arrangements were suddenly unavailable and the chaos it would cause for the bride and her family. I pictured their expressions, shock, disbelief, and eventually the dawning realization that they had underestimated me. Every carefully calculated step would serve as a reminder of who held the true power behind this event. As the evening approached, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and satisfaction. The humiliation had shifted into a plan, and the plan into a silent, brewing revenge. I would not act recklessly or angrily. I would act with precision, ensuring maximum impact without diminishing my own dignity. This was the turning point where my quiet suffering transformed into control, and the rising tension of the previous hours had prepared me for the moment when I would finally assert myself. The guests continued their laughter and applause, oblivious to the storm that was quietly gathering, one that would soon change the course of this wedding and leave a lasting mark on everyone who had disrespected me. As the evening deepened, the festivities continued with music, laughter, and dancing. Guests were caught up in the celebration, unaware of the tension that simmered beneath the surface. I stayed on the edges of the crowd, a silent observer, my mind fully focused on what needed to be done. The humiliation from the previous night had not faded. It had transformed into a clear sense of purpose, a blueprint for restoring my dignity. I began contacting key vendors discreetly, reviewing contracts, and confirming every detail that I could manipulate. The flowers, catering, lighting, and even the entertainment, all of it was under my control. The thought that I could subtly change the course of the evening without anyone immediately realizing it thrilled me. Every small disruption would carry weight, teaching the bride and her family that disrespect had consequences. I observed the bride closely. She was oblivious to the fact that her actions had fueled this calculated plan. Every laugh, every dismissive glance she gave me, every gesture that had undermined my presence was recorded in my mind. I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction, knowing that she was completely unaware of the storm I was quietly orchestrating. My son, still caught between his bride and me, remained unaware of the power shift taking place. I realized that the lesson needed to be subtle but undeniable. Respect would not be demanded with anger. It would be commanded through decisive, controlled actions that revealed who truly held authority over the wedding arrangements. By nightfall, the rising action had reached its peak. The stage was set, the pieces were in place, and the plan was ready to unfold. The humiliation I had endured had been transformed into a silent, strategic power. What had begun as a moment of rejection and disrespect had evolved into an opportunity, a chance to assert control, reclaim dignity, and ensure that everyone involved would learn that underestimating me was a grave mistake. Every smile, every toast, every clinking glass of champagne around me now served as a backdrop to the impending revelation. The bride's arrogance, the son's hesitation, the guest's obliviousness, all of it was about to collide with the calculated consequences of their own actions. By the end of the night, no one would doubt who had the final say, and the lesson in respect and authority would be unforgettable. The moment arrived when the culmination of humiliation and quiet planning would collide. As the bride and groom were about to cut the wedding cake, I received confirmation from the vendors. Everything was ready, yet I held the power to change the course of the celebration. My heart raced not with fear but with anticipation. The night that had begun with laughter and joy was about to take an unexpected turn. I stepped forward, catching the attention of a few guests, and smiled politely. Nobody suspected that behind my calm demeanor was a carefully crafted plan, ready to unravel the pride and arrogance of those who had disrespected me. The bride's eyes flickered toward me briefly, but she remained confident, perhaps believing that her control over the event was absolute. She was wrong. With subtle gestures, I instructed key vendors to adjust certain arrangements, slightly delaying the cake, changing the music cue, and redirecting servers to temporarily withhold select dishes. Each action was small enough to avoid chaos, but significant enough to signal that I was not powerless. As these minor disruptions began to ripple through the event, I observed her face carefully. The smirk that had haunted me now faltered, replaced by confusion and a dawning realization. Guests noticed minor delays and whispered among themselves. The bride's composed exterior began to crack as she realized that someone was orchestrating the events behind the scenes. She looked around frantically, her confidence waning. I maintained my serene posture, sipping a glass of champagne while inside satisfaction coursed through me. Every subtle action reminded her, and everyone else, that the man she had dismissed was far from irrelevant. My son, still caught in the whirlwind, glanced at me with growing concern. He finally understood that the father he had taken for granted was quietly in control of everything. This was the turning point. The humiliation I had suffered earlier had now transformed into authority, and the lesson I intended to deliver was beginning to take shape. The bride's power had been challenged, and the realization of her misjudgment was evident. In her eyes, the stage was set for the ultimate reveal, the moment where the full impact of my calculated actions would leave no doubt about who truly held influence over this wedding. This was not just about revenge. It was about restoring dignity, asserting respect, and ensuring that everyone involved would remember this night for the lessons it had taught them. The bride's initial confusion quickly turned into panic. Servers hesitated as their instructions subtly changed. Flowers were moved just slightly out of place, and the music cues skipped in a way that seemed accidental. But to the keen observer, Everything pointed toward a deliberate hand. Guests whispered nervously, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. The glamorous wedding they had anticipated was no longer running seamlessly. She tried to regain control, issuing hurried commands to the staff, waving her hands to correct minor mistakes. But with each attempt, another small disruption occurred, one I had carefully orchestrated. The delay in the cake presentation, the rearranged seating of a few VIP guests, and the subtle confusion with the floral arrangements made it clear. I was quietly in charge. The tension in the room mounted. My son finally realized the extent of the situation. His eyes met mine, wide with a mixture of shock and understanding. He now grasped what I had endured the night before, the subtle humiliations he had ignored, and the quiet planning I had executed to reclaim my dignity. He understood that the power balance had shifted, and it was undeniable. Meanwhile, the bride, her composure unraveling, looked around helplessly. She had assumed that her audacity would go unchallenged, that my financial contributions could not be turned against her. She was wrong. Each carefully calculated move demonstrated that the man she had dismissed, the one she told to leave, was entirely capable of shaping the outcome of the day. The guests, oblivious to the history behind the tension, began murmuring amongst themselves. They sensed the shift in atmosphere, the subtle chaos that hinted at an unseen force steering the event. I remained calm, smiling politely, concealing the satisfaction and vindication that coursed through me. The humiliation I had suffered had now been transformed into a demonstration of control, respect, and calculated authority. In that moment, it became clear to everyone, especially to the bride, that I was not to be dismissed. Every subtle disruption, every controlled action spoke louder than words ever could. The lesson was unfolding before their eyes, and the wedding, which had started as an attempt to humiliate me, was now a stage for the acknowledgement of my power, my influence, and my dignity. By the time the final toast was announced, the atmosphere had completely shifted. The bride, now flustered and visibly anxious, tried to salvage the grandeur of the event. She smiled at guests, but the forced nature of it betrayed her. Every minor adjustment I had orchestrated, from the timing of the music to the placement of centerpieces, was now amplifying her unease. What had begun as subtle disruptions had escalated into a series of unmistakable reminders that the person she had disrespected was quietly in command. I could see her searching for someone to blame, her eyes darting nervously across the room. The guests, caught between curiosity and amusement, whispered among themselves. Some noticed the irregularities, while others remained unaware of the underlying tension. But for the bride, each small imperfection was a glaring symbol of the control she had assumed she possessed, and that I had decisively reclaimed. My son finally approached me, hesitating, as if unsure how to reconcile the man he knew with the one who had orchestrated this quiet revolution. "Dad, I didn't realize." He started, but the words faltered on his lips. I gave him a calm, controlled nod. No anger, no confrontation, just authority. He understood without a single word that I had made my point. The humiliation of the previous night had been reversed, replaced with a subtle but undeniable dominance. The bride's expression shifted from panic to disbelief. She had underestimated me, believed that wealth and arrogance could suppress respect, and had failed to recognize the power of careful planning. The guests, while unaware of the intricate details behind the tension, sensed that the balance of control had changed. The room's energy had shifted. The air of arrogance that had surrounded the bride now seemed fragile, almost brittle. In that moment, the climax of the story became undeniable. The humiliation I had endured was transformed into a demonstration of control and respect. The wedding, once intended to exalt the bride's authority and dismiss me, had become a stage where my quiet power and determination were fully revealed. No words were needed. The actions spoke volumes. Everyone present, especially the bride, understood that I was no longer the one to be dismissed, ignored, or disrespected. The final moments of the evening brought the full weight of realization crashing down on everyone involved. The bride, her composure completely shattered, realized that every attempt to assert control had been subtly undermined. The cake, which should have been the pinnacle of celebration, was delayed just enough to create tension. The music played at the wrong cue. The seating arrangements shifted without notice, all minor yet unmistakably deliberate. Guests began noticing the discrepancies, murmuring to one another in confusion. The bride's anxiety became palpable, her attempts to mask it failing at every turn. She had thought that I was powerless, that my financial contributions would be taken for granted and my presence dismissed. But through careful orchestration, I had demonstrated control without confrontation, letting my actions speak louder than any words could. My son, now fully aware of the effort, sacrifice, and strategy behind my decisions, looked at me with a mixture of awe, guilt, and newfound respect. He realized that the man he had thought submissive to his bride's whims was in fact quietly commanding the events of the day. The dynamic had shifted entirely, and the lesson was clear. Respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned, and it could be taken away when disregarded. The bride's arrogance had been replaced with a growing understanding of her misjudgment. She looked around, seeing the subtle chaos and the controlled disruptions, finally recognizing that her dismissive attitude and attempts to humiliate me had consequences. In orchestrating this, I had not only reclaimed my dignity, but had also subtly taught everyone present the cost of disrespect. By the end of the evening, what had begun as a night of celebration for the couple had become a silent testament to the power of careful planning, composure, and authority. The humiliation I had suffered transformed into empowerment, and everyone, especially the bride, understood that underestimating me was a grave mistake. The climax had reached its peak, the turning point where humiliation became respect and control had been fully restored. After the controlled disruptions, the atmosphere gradually began to settle. Guests, initially confused by the minor mishaps, started to enjoy the rest of the celebration, oblivious to the subtle lessons that had just been delivered. The bride, however, remained tense, her composure fragile as she processed what had happened. She could no longer dismiss me or underestimate my influence. Every decision I had made that evening was a reminder of the power I still held over the event. I observed my son quietly. He was no longer fully confident in the illusion that he controlled everything. The realization had dawned that the man he had taken for granted, his own father, was capable of influencing and correcting even the most meticulously planned events. There was a newfound respect in his eyes, mingled with guilt and awe. I had not raised him to challenge authority disrespectfully, and tonight the lesson was clear. Slowly I walked through the hall, making casual conversation with guests, offering smiles and polite nods. Every gesture was deliberate, calm, and collected. The bride's family attempted to regain their earlier confidence, but subtle glances toward me betrayed their awareness that they had been quietly outmaneuvered. Each step I took reinforced the authority I had established, reminding everyone present that respect was not optional. As the evening wore on, the energy of the room shifted. The initial tension faded, replaced by a muted acknowledgement of the power dynamics at play. The bride's earlier arrogance had given way to humility, and my son had finally absorbed the reality of the situation. What could have escalated into a public confrontation had instead been transformed into a quiet, controlled demonstration of authority. The humiliation of the previous night had been inverted, and dignity was fully restored, not through anger but through strategic, deliberate action. As the reception continued, the bride tried to regain control of the evening, but every attempt was met with subtle reminders of the power she had underestimated. The servers and vendors, following the slight adjustments I had made earlier, executed tasks flawlessly yet on my terms. Each minor adjustment, the delayed desserts, the rearranged flowers, and the shifted seating kept the message clear: I was not to be dismissed. I moved quietly among the guests, speaking with family members and friends, sharing light-hearted stories and laughter, all the while maintaining the calm exterior of a man who had orchestrated the night perfectly. My presence alone served as a constant, silent reminder that the events had been carefully guided by me. The bride's attempts to assert dominance over the wedding had failed. She now operated under my subtle influence without even realizing it. My son approached me briefly, a mix of gratitude and regret in his eyes. "Dad, I didn't realize," he murmured, and I placed a hand on his shoulder, nodding reassuringly. No words were needed. He understood. The lesson had been conveyed through action, through precision, and through the demonstration of authority. Respect had been quietly restored, and the humiliation of the previous night had been turned on its head. Meanwhile, the guests continued their celebration, unaware of the tension that had unfolded behind the smiles and music. The bride, however, could no longer ignore it. Each small mistake, each subtle disruption, had conveyed the full extent of her misjudgment. She had been taught, without confrontation or shouting, that respect could not be ignored or taken lightly. The evening, which had started with the intention of humiliating me, had transformed into a testament to control, dignity, and strategic planning. The initial tension faded into a quiet resolution. I had regained my place, restored authority, and subtly reminded everyone involved that underestimating a parent's dedication, influence, and presence was a grave mistake. The wedding continued, but the balance of power had permanently shifted, and I was now firmly in control. As the evening moved toward its conclusion, the bride's demeanor had completely changed. The confidence she had exuded earlier was replaced with unease and forced politeness. She realized that the minor disruptions she had initially ignored were no accidents. They were carefully orchestrated to convey a message she could not ignore. Her attempts to regain composure were futile. Every action I had taken subtly reminded her of the respect she had failed to show. I noticed guests exchanging glances, some curious, others impressed, though none fully grasped the intricacies of what had transpired. Only the bride and my son understood the gravity of the situation. My calm presence contrasted sharply with the anxiety around her, highlighting that true authority does not shout, it acts. Every small correction, every delay, every minor inconvenience had been a calculated part of the lesson in respect and humility. My son came to me quietly, away from the crowd. "Dad, I see now." "I should have," he began, but I simply shook my head, smiling gently. No words were necessary. The events of the evening had spoken louder than any conversation could. The respect he had overlooked, and the misjudgment of his bride had been corrected through measured action. This was a lesson in dignity and authority, conveyed silently yet unmistakably. Meanwhile, the atmosphere among the remaining guests had returned to celebration, though tinged with an unspoken awareness that the balance of power had shifted. The bride moved cautiously, careful not to further disrupt the delicate order that I had subtly re-established. She had learned that authority could be asserted without shouting or anger, and that humiliation could be turned into a quiet yet undeniable demonstration of control. By this point, the evening had transformed. What had begun as a joyous celebration of union had become a testament to strategy, patience, and the restoration of respect. I had taken the humiliation I endured and converted it into a demonstration of composure, authority, and deliberate action. The lesson was clear. Those who underestimate a father's dedication and influence do so at their own peril. As the night drew to a close, the wedding had returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet the underlying lesson had been firmly established. The bride no longer displayed arrogance. Every gesture was measured, every word carefully chosen. The subtle disruptions I had orchestrated earlier had conveyed a powerful message. Respect is earned, and those who attempt to humiliate or dismiss others will face consequences, often in ways they never anticipated. I walked among the guests one final time, offering polite smiles and nods, observing their enjoyment of the celebration I had financed and controlled. Yet beneath the surface, the evening had been irrevocably altered. The balance of authority had shifted, and the lesson had been delivered without a single raised voice or public confrontation. The humiliation of the previous night had been transformed into quiet empowerment. My son approached me once more, his eyes reflecting both admiration and regret. "Dad, thank you," he whispered, understanding that the dignity and respect I commanded had not only restored my honor but had also reinforced the importance of valuing those who support and sacrifice for you. He realized, perhaps too late, that the bond between a parent and child carries weight far beyond the surface of a single day. The bride, fully aware of the subtle control I had exercised, made no further attempts to assert dominance. The lesson had been delivered through precision and patience, leaving a lasting impression that would influence not only her behavior, but also the future dynamics within the family. Every guest, even if unaware of the intricacies, had felt the change in energy, a quiet acknowledgement that the man they had dismissed was far from powerless. By the end of the evening, the wedding, which had begun as a potential scene of humiliation for me, had become a testament to strategy, authority, and composure. Respect had been reclaimed, dignity restored, and the consequences of arrogance made unmistakably clear. The night concluded with subtle triumph, leaving everyone, especially the bride, to reflect on the quiet yet undeniable power of measured action and unwavering resolve. If you enjoyed this story of cunning, patience, and justice, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Revenge Realness for more jaw-dropping tales of revenge that leave everyone speechless. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone getting the ultimate payback? Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video that will shock, amaze, and inspire you. Remember, respect is earned, and sometimes the most powerful lessons come quietly, but leave a mark that lasts forever. Stay tuned for the next story, where revenge isn't just sweet, it's unforgettable.